Hi
All right,
there.
we're live. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. This is awesome.
All right, good. Now we're cooking with gas. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing really good. Thank you for inviting me to do this.
Oh, no. Thank you for having me. I feel like there's so many different things that we talk about that are synergistic that it just makes sense. And I love your passion for conscious parenting because even though my page is about personal growth, it really comes down to the reality that parents are people too. And the more we're able to grow as people, the more we're able to show up in all the different roles that we play, whether that's as parents, as employees, employers, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm a lot about conscious development and growth mindset and emotional awareness, but boy, there's no better teacher of all that stuff than being a parent. And the more we grow and evolve our emotional awareness, the better that we parent, and that's world changing stuff in my view. And I don't know if your situation is similar to mine, but I was not taught or modeled any of that stuff growing up. I had to learn on the fly while my kids were like screaming and melting down, and it was like, how how do I figure out how to best serve them and maintain the sanity in my household and make copacetic relationships with my wife? And so my wife and I were kind of like learning our own emotional intelligence as we had some explosive kiddos on the fly, and we all kind of grew and learned together. But really, emotional maturity, emotional awareness, emotional regulation, those are the ticket to getting good results with your kids. Results meaning compliance is what most people think of, but also like nurturing, relationship, engagement, development, building their self-esteem, and getting all the stuff that everybody wants as far as like, you want them to do their chores and get good grades. Regardless, I think it's all about connection and emotional development of ourselves. And then in turn, that's how we nurture them. You can't really coach somebody unless you know how to do it yourself. But none of us were really given the tools to do that. At least I sure wasn't growing up, So I think a lot of us are in the same boat there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to sort of answer your question, I think I'm really thankful because I had the opportunity to be around caregivers who were very intentional about and helping me be in touch with my emotions and my reactions to the things that happened. So when I was a kid, I really struggled with anger, and I was that explosive and rebellious kid, and I'm really thankful because there were so many things that I did, there were so many situations that I encountered where the response that I got was just so focused on maintaining the connection and really teaching me through that connection, hey, I know you're really upset right now. I get it. Let's take a step back. Let's figure out what you can do about your upset feeling that's not going to be harmful to you, that's not going to be harmful to other people. And instead of getting so caught up in the emotion, think about what is causing it, think about a problem that you can solve, and then we're here to give you the tools to solve the problem so that the next time you get angry, instead of just sitting in that anger, you can switch right to problem solving.
They did it right. I'm so glad you got that experience. That's the way we do it in our household. That's not what was done for me growing up. But they didn't know
Yeah,
any better. They didn't have the tools either. Um,
right, absolutely, and that's one of the things that I really do a lot to focus in on in my work because I work with a lot of parents who they are coming from those backgrounds where they just don't know, they don't have the tools, they don't have the resources, and they're in this situation where their kids are doing things that they never expected or imagined, and they
yeah,
are just they're at a loss, and so I
that's where
might
we
get
were
the
at.
parent. I might get the parent who is then beating themselves up for having this explosive reaction in response to their child's explosive reaction. And I have to kind of walk them back and say, hey, listen, you are doing what you know. This is not about you being the bad guy. This is not about you failing your kids. This is about you recognizing, hey, this is really hard for me. And this is hard for me because I didn't grow up in an environment where I learned how to do these things. And now that I'm a parent, every single thing that happened to me when I was a kid is coming out.
Yeah,
And those tools that I didn't get are now putting me at a disadvantage because there are a lot of times when you'll have a parent who's saying, I can see this is how my parents responded to me, and I know that I didn't like it. I know that the harm that it caused to me, but I see myself doing the same thing with my kids, and that's so frustrating. And that's when I have to say, hey, listen, this is happening because this is what you know. This is literally hardwired into your brain to react this way. And so it's taking that step back, having some self-compassion, and then picking up the tools, practicing them, getting better, and then getting to see this new way of being and this new way of engaging with your kids.
So Deborah, you're a parent coach then, or what exactly is it that you do?
So I am a speech language pathologist by background and training, and so I worked with the little, so 0 to 3 for many years. And one of the things that happened was because I was just seeing these recurring trends where you had a parent who said, well, I would like to see my child use more words to communicate. But then I would watch their interactions and just notice that there were just all of these gaps in the way that they were engaging with their child and, the response that their child was presenting with. And I was saying, hey, I can see that your child is not communicating right now because they're really frustrated. And I can see that they're really frustrated because they're having an experience to the situation that happened to them, but they're not getting the response that they need from you. And so I just, from that point, I just started to do just a little bit of more of my own research, started to do a little bit more, I kind of got a little bit more education under my belt. I started a doctoral program in infant and early childhood development with an emphasis on infant mental health, just to think about it from the perspective of saying, well, there are so many things that happen to, or that adults struggle with that didn't start in adulthood, right? They started right from infancy, from childhood. And if we can really identify some best practices for creating environments where infants and children are growing in, it's just going to make for so much better outcomes when they're adults.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, so how about this? You called this meeting. I want to put you in the driver's seat. I'm sure we're going to go back and forth, but what were some of the things that you wanted to touch on?
Well, I really wanted to talk very kind of specifically about the idea of conscious parenting, because I think a lot, there's so many words that we use when we think about parenting. There's out there. There's gentle parenting. There's, I think it's authoritarian parenting. There, lots of terms, and I think it's so important for us to say, what exactly is it we mean by conscious parenting, and what it is how can we, create a vision for the type of life that you want for your child? Because that's really what it is. You're saying, I envision this for my child. I want them to be successful in school. I want them to be able to build good relationships with the people around them. I want them to be happy. I want them to thrive. There are all these different things. That's what parents want for their kids, right? But then sometimes it kind of gets drilled down into, well, I want you to get all A's, or I want you to listen, I want you to do your chores, I want you to do this, where, really what's behind it is this sense of, I want to make sure that, my child is growing up and they're ready for the world. They're equipped to deal with challenges. They're equipped to deal with authority figures. They're equipped to, do all these different types of things that will help them be successful in life. And so then it's saying conscious parenting is about recognizing what steps are going to help you get to that place as a parent so that your children can have that future that you envision for them.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And sometimes what you envision for your kiddos, I want them to get straight A's. I want them to be equipped for the world. I want them to be able to deal with authority figures, all those things that you named. Sometimes those might be in conflict with them being emotionally healthy or happy. Like maybe they're getting all A's, but you don't know it. They have so much pressure brewing up under the surface that it's a personal choice. But for me, I'd rather have A's, B's, and C's and have them be ideally both. But if not, I'll trade the grades for emotional health 7 days a week. But a lot of times we don't really think about that. And then we don't even necessarily unpack our why. Well, why do I need them to get straight A's? Is it because I needed that? Is that what I value? What are my values? And what is my intention behind parenting? And a lot of it is we're just kind of winging it, and we're kind of doing what we were conditioned to do, and we're not putting a lot of thought and intention behind it, because once you become a parent, life goes 1,000 miles an hour. But sometimes, like with my kids' temperaments, my son, I think he might be a little bit, he's got ADHD. He's super hyper intelligent. Straight A's is no problem for him. But like we have behavioral issues at school left and right. Whereas my daughter, she can get straight A's if she wanted to, but we had a really good conversation about a year and a half ago where she just unloaded on me all this pressure that she was suffocating. I wasn't putting the pressure on her, but she was just like suffocating herself with pressure to maintain her grades. And so each kid's temperament and abilities are so different. And so I think it has a lot to do with just like the word conscious parenting inherently is we're doing it consciously, right? We're doing it intentionally. We're looking at the bigger picture and the whole person, and what is our motivation? Like, if I were to say you down, what is the most important thing what's the most important thing? When all's said and done, how did you parent? What did you get out of them? Is it that they got straight A's? That's awesome. Is it that they're emotionally fit? What if you had to sacrifice in one area? What if you can't quite meet all of those needs? It really comes down to what's important to you. But I think at the end of the day, if you nurture your own mind and your heart and your emotions, and you stay conscious and aware and regulated, and you foster connection and teach them those things, regardless of all of those arenas, you're going to set yourself up for the best possibility of success as far as your relationship with them and their ability to function in the real world. The best chance they have is you being in touch with your mind and your emotions, and connecting that to them and your relationship with them, regardless of what your agenda is.
100,000%. And it's almost like you just gave me an opening to start talking about attachment. But and I won't go like super technical into it, but attachment theory is something that was developed, way back in the 1970s by these psychologists. And what they actually conducted studies to sort of observe and measure the reactions of infants and toddlers whenever one of their parents or primary caregivers left the room. And so they were able to, based on how the children responded, categorize these very specific attachment styles. So they kind of had the secure attachment style, which was, if the parent left the room, the child would become upset and cry, and when they came back, they would, calm down, and they'd be really happy and excited to see their parent. And they sort of characterized that as this type of attachment where, the child understands that, they're recognizing that their parent has left. They're sad because they're so connected to their parent, and they really see their parent as a source of safety. And so it's a very natural reaction. If your source of safety leaves the room, you're going to become upset, and you're going to become dysregulated. And then they were able to calm down fairly quickly once their source of safety came back in the room. And then they were able to identify the insecure attachment styles, which were some of the kids who they either just didn't even notice that their parent had left the room and didn't react when they came back, or the kids who they just become inconsolable after the parent left the room, and even when the parent came back, they just couldn't be calmed down. And so those attachment styles are really the way that as children, as infants, we bond with our parents and caregivers, and in that understanding of that caregiver representing safety, representing calm and regulated emotions, but then the distress that happens when the caregiver is gone or not present really signifies the child's then ability to self-regulate, but then also to reconnect after that parent or caregiver comes back. And so, it's something that plays out in adult relationships where, if you have a child who has what's called an avoidant attachment style, what's happened is over time they've learned that their caregiver's not going to be responsive to their emotional needs, and so they just don't exhibit any emotional needs, not because they don't have them, but because they've sort of learned that it doesn't matter, it's not going to be acknowledged. And so, you have the parents who are, tend to be emotionally distant, tend not to respond to their child when their child is crying, maybe say things like stop crying, or, anything that communicates to the child that it's not okay, it's not acceptable to have emotions or to express emotions. That then creates a child who starts to avoid anything that puts them in that emotionally vulnerable state. And then you could sort of have almost the opposite of it, which is the anxious attachment style, and that's more of that's a child who's learned to not be able to predict when their caregiver is going to respond to them. And so they're just thinking, well, I'm in distress. Maybe they'll come, maybe they won't. And so I'm just perpetually in distress, and I've not really been able to leverage this connection with my caregiver and have it be a source of regulation, have it be a source of safety. And then sort of the fourth insecure attachment style is called the fearful avoidant. I think in some, but the original name was disorganized, but I have some thoughts and feelings about the use of that term, and so I tend to use more the fearful avoidant terminology, and that's really a combination of the anxious and the avoidant attachment styles. And so that's going to be a person who they're kind of constantly going back and forth between being emotionally closed off, emotionally distant, with being like really, really fearful that they're going to be abandoned, really, really fearful that they're not going to get comfort from their caregivers. And of course, this plays out in relationships, across the lifespan, and it really takes a toll on a person's ability to be in touch with their emotions, to manage their emotions, because they're just reacting to that sort of foundation of attachment that was built from so early on.
That's interesting because it's very difficult as adults to sit with somebody else while they're emotionally dysregulated without either becoming dysregulated and being reactive ourselves, becoming tense, hot energy, or we want to avoid it entirely, like don't cry, I'm not comfortable with that, or to not take on their emotions. That's challenging for many of us, but it's so important because like regulation a lot of times comes from it can be the caregiver, but it can also be like my wife and I can do it with each other. The mirror neurons, like when you sneeze and somebody else sneezes, because a sneeze is contagious, or if you walk into a table and everybody's laughing and you just kind of start chuckling, you don't know why. The same thing can be said for staying calm and regulated with emotions. So with your children, if you can share space with them while they're emotionally dysregulated, particularly if they're attacking you, it's very hard. You get triggered, but if you can maintain your composure, soften up, relax your face, calm your tone of voice down, that bleeds over into them. They say neurons that fire together wire together. That literally has a scientific contagious effect on that. So that's why a lot of the things that you just said really resonated. I didn't understand all the attachment styles. I didn't know all that, but for sure that's been my experience too. And a lot of it is like, for me, I don't know, I was just kind of like latchkey kid, like handle your emotions on your own. And it's like, I have really big feelings, but then I'm like, my feelings are numb because like what you said, like I think I've probably vacillated from these different type of attachment things. And as an adult, becoming super emotionally aware and regulated has been really helpful to sit with my children and their own emotions. And as crazy as the explosions can get, there's no faster way to solving tension and hostility in your household, even though it's so hard, than like softening up and relaxing and staying regulated and soothing your kids, even if they're big kids, little kids or big kids. And so that's where our own emotional regulation and awareness and meditation practice comes into play, to know when we're triggered, to be aware of our body language. Like, is my face tense? Am I yelling? Sometimes we don't even know we're yelling, it's weird. But the kids, they pick up on that energy big time. They know it when you're hot,
Yes, absolutely. And I think so. One of the things that happened for me, just going through my processes of coaching parents, was as I started to learn more and more about the science behind it, I really doubled down and said, when we think about all of the different, processes around us, whether it's natural processes like, plants growing, or whether it's something like a car, there's a very specific way that all these things function. And we might see this external behavior or these external presentations, but there's something that's going on under the hood. And so I think you described it so beautifully, talking about the mirror neurons. And, we also have the neurotransmitters that are involved, where when I found this out, it was just like, it made so much sense, but then really kind of thinking about just how it plays out in that very kind of conditional logic way. It's just, I think it brings a lot of hope to this process of consciously, intentionally making choices that are different than maybe we've experienced in the past, to be able to say, well, maybe I didn't get a chance to see my parents being calm, but there is a process for learning how to be calm. And so I'm just going to start that process, and I'm going to keep doing it every day, and I'm going to get better and better and better, and then I'm going to find myself just responding differently in the moments when I'm triggered. So, you kind of talked about that balance, right, between calming it for parents to be calm and having that be something that then calms their kids. One of the coolest things about that is, like, you've got the stress hormone cortisol, which is responsible for that fight or flight response, right? And that's what gets us all amped up because, you've got adrenaline, you've got norepinephrine, and you've got all this stuff that's happening when we perceive that something unsafe, something threatening, whether it's physically threatening, whether it's emotionally threatening. And every single individual, every single person on this planet has that response. However, what helps us learn to regulate that response is when there are other sort of neurotransmitters that are at play. And probably one of the most important ones is oxytocin.
Oxytocin,
Which is they call it the love hormone, but it's really the relationship connection hormone. And so when the higher the levels of oxytocin in our system, the lower the levels of cortisol. Like, quite literally, it lowers it. And so if you as a parent are calming yourself and you are, just focusing on that connection with your child's stress response is going to go down, way down, because the one thing that's responsible for the stress response is the cortisol.
Let's talk a little bit about how we stay calm, because like Emily brought up a good point here. Let's talk a little bit about our own mechanisms and how we increase oxytocin and how we learn to become calm around our kids. Because like Emily says here, staying calm is so hard for a lot of parents. I think we should probably touch on that because that's probably where the biggest struggle is. And for me personally, I'm super calm with my kids even when they're hot now, but that was like I was not expecting explosive kids. I'm a dude. I'm a firefighter. Like, I'm an aggressive, masculine dude who was like not raised in an environment where I was emotionally nurtured. So when my kids started yelling at me, I was not expecting that. That wasn't how I handled my parents. And so like I had to really, over the last 12 years, it has been like a discipline and a practice. And I have learned how to stay calm when triggered and how to soothe myself and stay regulated. But it was so hard. And so I'd love to share our experiences and knowledge of how to actually get there in complements with having grace on yourself, as you mentioned at the beginning, because I think that is probably, I want to read her comment here in a minute, but I think that is the biggest. So my partner hasn't. So any advice on how I can talk to him to encourage? That's the next question in a moment here. Actually, I want to get to that one too, Emily. But I think that probably a lot of parents struggle with, like, they don't want to lose their temper at their kids. They want to stay calm, but our kids trigger the shit out of us. Like, it's hard not to, especially if you weren't, like, I'm so thankful you were taught these skills growing up. I was like not set up for emotional success growing up. I didn't know, all of a sudden it was just like rage, and it's like somebody's yelling at me, and yeah, like when I can step outside of it, it's my kid and I love her and all this stuff. But in the moment, it's like, I don't know, like oxytocin goes down, cortisol goes up, and it's like a threat, fight or flight. And so for me, I know a few things that really helped me through that process. I look at like a meditation practice as like going into the gym, and I have to be so disciplined with it. And it's like I preach meditation, because really, if you sit down for 5 or 10 minutes a day, every day, even when you don't feel like it, as a discipline, like, you don't have to enjoy it. You don't have to like it. It's like brushing your teeth. If you don't brush your teeth, you get cavities. If you don't meditate, you don't have that space in your mind, because what it does is, a lot of people don't like meditating. It's not really so much about your experience on the mat. It's all of a sudden, if you do it day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, for me personally, that noticing my thoughts, coming back to the breath, relaxing my body, that creates muscle memory. And then all of a sudden, one day, that guy cuts you off in traffic, or your kids yell at you, and you feel that rage, but instead of like responding, you're actually like instinctively, one breath sometimes is all it takes. Come back to the breath, relax your face, and you have just a little bit of space. And in that space, you can choose how to respond. You can soften your tone of voice. You can be aware of your body language. You can not be at the mercy of your emotions. And then maybe it's like a threat and you got to punch the guy in the face, but maybe it's your kid and you want to love her through the tantrum. You get to choose how you conduct yourself, even though you're having those big feelings yourself and you're being triggered. And then also staying ahead of my emotions, like doing journaling practice, venting when I'm angry, talking to a counselor, like putting out the little spot fires and grieving when I lose loved ones. A lot of people, we just like my mom recently passed away. Like, I don't just shove that down and move past it. Like, you have to process that stuff, because a lot of times with anger, you kind of said this in a different way, but it's the tip of the iceberg. And underneath it, like to Emily, to get to like your partner, a lot of times that anger that he's feeling is like unprocessed childhood trauma and shame and embarrassment and suppressed emotions and all these avoidant attachment stuff where we're numb to our emotions. And then the straw breaks the camel's back, but there's so much more to anger going on underneath the surface. So for me, it's like I guess a three-pronged approach. Meditation's a big one. Emotionally processing is a big one. And then when we're not in the heat of the moment, and this might be helpful for your husband, I'm not sure, or your partner, excuse me, like we do like 20-second hugs in our house. Like, cause I remember my kids and I were watching National Geographic one time when they were little, and it said, scientists believe if you put your heart to heart and you hug for 20 seconds, they've actually been able to measure an increase in oxytocin. And whether there's science behind that or not, I don't really know, but like doing things like playing when I don't feel like it, more hugs than I feel like, because sometimes we're busy or we're tired or we're grumpy, we've had a bad day. Sometimes you really want to hug your kids. Sometimes you don't feel like it, but just like making sure to like make eye contact when it's not in the heat of the moment. So like if it's like a bank account, I'm putting oxytocin deposits and love deposits in throughout the day. And then when the shit hits the fan, does that make sense? So for me, it's like a three-pronged approach on how to stay calm. But honestly, this is like after a decade of practicing, and it wasn't easy at first. So a lot of people struggle with all this stuff. So I don't know. I just kind of talked a lot. What are your thoughts on all that?
No, I mean, all of that, and you know, I think one of the really cool things about it, you know, coming from a place where I, you know, I've kind of spent all this time like learning the science behind it and kind of putting things together, you know, getting to just hear, you know, about your experience and how you sort of lived through and how you're putting these things into practice and sort of recognizing just how valuable these things are for keeping you regulated and then transferring that to your kids. It's just phenomenal. And so, yeah, so my thoughts are, yes, it's, you know, I would say, you know, if we want to put something at the top of the list, it is absolutely being able to get to that place of being in touch with your own emotions and understanding, well, my kid did that, and I felt this rage, or I felt this fear, or I felt this sadness. You know, even there are some people who they just feel the emotion, but they don't know what it is, and that just comes from years of not having learned. Oh, if you feel this physiological change in your body, it's because you're mad. And you're mad because something happened that you didn't expect and you don't know how to handle it. And you know, something as simple as that can then escalate to, I am just feeling this mixed bag of emotions all the time. I don't know where they're coming from. I don't know how to handle them. And so I just need to control my external environment so that I don't feel this way, because this is overwhelming. And our emotions are powerful, incredibly powerful. I know I don't ever tell you that. But, you know, but it's recognizing that what really is at the root of some of these explosive reactions is I'm feeling this really big feeling, and I don't know what to do with it. I don't know where to put it. I don't know where it is. And it is putting me in this state of discomfort, and I don't want to feel this way. And so because, you know, for people who haven't had the opportunity to learn how to, you know, be in their emotions and recover from their emotions, you know, they just want to get rid of it. And the quickest thing to do to try to get rid of this really strong emotion is to try to control someone else's behavior.
Very true.
Try to control your environment. Try to make them stop. And so that's where we can then get some of those reactions that are really, you know, they're not about you lashing out at the other person. They're really about you trying to just frantically trying to do whatever is going to make this really strong emotion that you're experiencing to stop, so that you can feel better. Because we all just want to feel good.
I think a lot of people are uncomfortable feeling their feelings, and However, for me, it's so empowering because you can't control your external environment and you really can't control other people's behavior. But when you can have these powerful tools and then all of a sudden not lose your temper, like I tried to convince a lot of dudes, like other firemen and stuff, like tap into your emotions, like don't suppress them. You have them. But a lot of times we don't even, I'll ask my friends, like, can you name 5 human emotions? They're like anger, happy, like 2. Okay, come on. There's like 100, you know, like shame, embarrassment, fear, guilt, sadness, joy, happiness. There's a whole spectrum. And a lot of times though, none of us were taught what we're feeling in our body. What does that emotion look like? I'm not even aware. Like I'm yelling at somebody and then all of a sudden I'm crying. Oh my gosh, I was grieving. I didn't even realize it, but I thought I was mad. But it's so to be able to tap into them is empowering because you cannot control other people's behavior and your external. Maybe to an extent, your children, you can control them with compliance because you're bigger, louder, and stronger than them. But that's doesn't always work, and it's definitely not the way to make them a whole person and connect with them. And a lot of times, sometimes some kids have hot energy that even then you can't control them, and you can't control the weather, and you can't control your physical health. The one thing you can control is how you respond to things, but only if you're super tapped into your body and your emotions and your responses. And so it's very, very empowering when you stop losing your temper. Like as a man who lost my temper most of my life and has somebody who really hasn't in like a decade, it's powerful. It is so empowering to be like not at the mercy of those emotions. It doesn't mean I don't feel anger. It means like I don't have to like honk and flip people off in traffic. I can if I want to, but I usually don't want to. I'd rather sit in my coffee and listen to the music. And that's awesome because like you said, cortisol, that's not getting into a fist fight, screaming at your kids, tensing up your muscles. None of that is good for you. And half the time you're doing stuff that you regret and you have to do repair work on your relationship and all that stuff. So I don't know, my big goal is really to encourage people to not suppress or avoid their emotions. It's uncomfortable at first and we don't know how to do it, but these are skill sets. I learned them as a grown-up through counseling and through mental health struggles and stuff. You can learn them, you know, and you don't even have to wait till you're in crisis to learn them. That's why I'm so excited to talk to you and learn about these attachment things and different attachment styles and maybe any other, what other suggestions do you have as far as I think one last thing I was going to say to get back to Emily's question, I don't really know the details of how to talk to your partner. I will say this, you probably already know all this because we've had these conversations before and you're so sharp, but like if you are having a struggle with something like this, don't ever bring it up in the heat of the moment. Usually cooler heads prevail if you can like set aside, if it's possible, to have like a date night or whatever, just a cup of coffee in where it's like, I'm not mad, I'm not in the moment, you're not mad. Can we talk about this? And then don't throw any accusations out there, just like, hey, when this happens, I feel uncomfortable and I think it does X, Y, or Z to the kids. What are your thoughts on that? And then try to have a dialogue if that's possible. You've probably already done all that, but those are the things that come to mind as my wife and I wrestled with this stuff. To be honest with you, it was my wife calling me out on my temper a decade ago, and it was like, it sucked. She told me I scared her when I was like screaming and punching holes in walls. In retrospect, it seems so obvious, but like I was so emotionally unaware of the damage that I was causing and stuff. That's why I create reels on anger, and every time in the caption I say, I'm like, this is not coming from a place of judgment. This is coming from a place of somebody who used to turn into the Incredible Hulk and embarrass themselves and make their family uncomfortable. And that sucks. But also it's good news because you don't have to do that. And there are ways around it. And there are techniques you can use when you're not angry to make yourself more resilient in this area. And when you are angry, tap out. We have a tap out system. My wife and I we still get triggered or whatever. My kids are challenging. But like if one of us starts to get heated, we'll ask the language we use, because no parent wants to be parented by the other parent, right? Like no parent wants to have the dogs like sick the dogs off of their kid, but also like I don't want to yell at my kids or make them feel uncomfortable, and I don't want my wife to either. So we're kind of are allowed to pull each other off if we notice the other one's getting triggered. And the system that we've come up with is a tap out. So like if I feel like I'm starting to get heated with my kids way more beyond when I'm comfortable, I'll tell my wife, hey man, I'm getting triggered. Can I tap out? Can I tap you in? Like in wrestling, you know, they tap you out, tap you in. Or if she's like noticing that I'm getting heated and I don't notice it, hey man, are you down to take a tap out? Like that works for us. That's the language that doesn't ruffle our feathers and put us against each other, but also checks our behavior. But if you have a partner there with you, it is a teamwork thing. And sometimes one of you can be more regulated while the other one is dysregulated. And then sometimes the kid is throwing a 4 hour long tantrum. It's like, I'm tapping out, now I'm tapping back in, now I'm tapping out. We tag team it, you know what I mean? But it's not always easy. But I think communication is key, and I think collaboratively problem solving when you're not in the heat of the moment, and kind of having a plan in place when you're not in the thick of it is definitely going to be pivotal.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, one of the things that I've found to be really, really powerful is just like taking this attitude of curiosity, just saying, I'm just, wondering where this is coming from. You reacted this way, or, this happened and this is what you did. I'm just kind of curious, where that's coming from. And, it's, again, definitely not in the heat of the moment, because that's not the best time to kind of really process and reflect and think, well, why am I reacting this way, right? But that attitude of curiosity can go a long way toward, just making your partner feel safe and not judged. And, kind of think about it as, how do we feel when we think that someone is judging us? Our defenses, are up. We're like, oh, are you trying to say that I'm doing something wrong? Are you trying to say that I'm, hurting my kids? Whatever the case may be, where, in that moment, it can be really tough to see that your partner is on your side and is trying to help you to kind of see things more clearly or come up with a better approach. And, one of the things that I do find happens is that parent that is reacting to the kids or reacting to situations in a particular way, they are just living out what they grew up seeing, what they grew up experiencing. And that's really going to be a pivotal moment, that reflection, that's really going to be a pivotal moment for them to be able to take a step back and say, well, how do I want to parent? Like, what type of relationship do I want to have with my kids? And are my actions setting me up to have that relationship?
Those are really good provocative questions. Like, this is what you had. How did that feel? And is that how you want to do it? Because I think it's hard for us to acknowledge that we were conditioned, or that we're repeating patterns, or that our child is triggering our own inner child. I saw a comment on here a minute ago, like, that was how I felt when I was a toddler. It's happened to me too. Like, I'm parenting, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, if I could pause for a minute and be the watcher and watch my inner monologue, this feels exactly like it did when I was a little kid, and I'm responding from that place. And that is, that's challenging for a lot of people to lean into. But I think for me, it's almost like when you admit you're wrong, it's really hard at first. Like, when you're a youngster, we want to lie, we want to make excuses. But as like a grown up, I started learning that when I would just admit that I was wrong and say I was sorry, like, I never understood why more people didn't do that, because people have a lot of grace for you when you do that. Like, once you kind of accept the difficult truth, you can overcome it. There's a lot of power in that. But I don't know how to get, a lot of times I don't think people even recognize or are ready to hear that truth, that they're parenting from an unmet need that they had, or a condition that they had from childhood. Is that something that you work with parents on, and you help them see that?
Yes. And so I think it is really just, it's been such an incredible journey for me, because I've had the opportunity to see parents go from this place of, this total disconnection with their child, to this place of saying, oh, now I recognize what I was doing. Now I recognize how, my behavior was affecting my child in a way that I just had no intention of doing, didn't even recognize. And now, because I see it, I can see how my child is different. I can see how some of these things that I maybe wanted them to do that they weren't doing, that I was getting all riled up about, they're just naturally doing because of this deeper connection. And I think that really kind of goes back to that idea of getting the tools and really being able to have the mindset of saying, well, if I don't yet know how to do something, I wanted them to take steps to learn how to do it. And so one of the things that I always recommend to parents is, find someone who parents the way that you want to parent, and just spend time with them. Because one of the challenges, right, is like when we have these expectations of people who they haven't had the model to take on, they haven't had the opportunity to see anything different that they've experienced. They're going to need to see it. And so fun fact, right? So all of our sense organs have these things called sensory receptors, and they're actually responsible for taking all the information that we receive from our senses and funneling it back to our brain, where our brain actually processes it and then decides what to do with it, creates a context for all the things that we learn. So 70% of the receptors and the sensory receptors in our entire body is in our eyes. So what we see supersedes what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what we touch. What we see is so incredibly powerful to our ability to learn.
What you see is what you get, literally.
Literally. And so one of the things that can happen is if you have someone who does want to build different habits and they don't have a model to as a frame of reference, then it can be incredibly difficult. Like they can even get to a place where they're realizing, oh, what I'm doing isn't working. But if they don't have a model, if they don't have a vision for what they could be doing differently, then they're just going to be in this cycle of doing what they know and just really beating themselves up about it. And then that's not really helpful either, right? So I think, thinking about it, whether we're thinking about wanting to encourage partners, wanting to encourage friends, I think one of the most powerful ways that we can do that is to be that model and say, hey, do you see what I did here? Do you see how they responded? This felt more connected, or they had an opportunity to process this, whatever the case may be. And, I'd love to share just like a personal example, if that's okay, where I have a 3-year-old niece. I have a 3-year-old niece who she is very, very opinionated, very, very strong-willed. And, she's been that way right from birth, I think. And so she would say, hey, can you do this, can you do that? And she'd say, no. And it's very cute voice. She's like, no, I'm not going to do it. And so it's just been a journey, for my brother and his wife, just like raising her and working all of those things out, and they've learned to pick their battles. But there was this particular instance where we were at a graduation party. And so we were actually outside, and there were some people who were going inside, and so people were kind of doing their thing. And so she stood on the deck and she held the door open. And so, I said, hey, we can be outside or we can be inside. We don't want to leave the door open. And she said, no, I want the door open because I'm waiting for my friend. And I said, well, you can wait for her outside or you can wait for her inside. And she said, no. And in that moment, I thought, well, okay, let's take on this sort of like conscious approach. And so I said, well, I understand why you want to stay right here because you're waiting for your friend. But if we leave the door open, flies might come in and get on the food, and that would be super yucky. And she was like, oh, no, I don't want flies to get on the food. I'm going to shut the door. And so she shut the door and she stepped outside. And, it could have gone very differently with, an approach that said, oh, no, you will comply. You will listen to me right now. How dare you tell me no? But it was really an opportunity for her to process the bigger picture instead of what she was just thinking about, which was her very legitimate desire to wait for her friend. Like, so it made sense to her to stand in the door and leave the door open because she wasn't thinking about flies. But when I gave her that information, she had the time and the opportunity to process it and then to make a decision. And now she's learned a really valuable, way to think about sort of the larger consequences of her actions. And that's just much more effective than, I think what many people tend to be conditioned to, which is like, well, you have to get this child to comply because they should listen when an adult tells them what to do.
Yeah. And To an extent, I understand that because it drives me nuts that my kids won't ever do what I ask them to do. But the reality is we don't want our kids to be conditioned to be entirely compliant to everybody, no matter what. We want to give them the critical thinking skills, the discernment, the ability to understand logical consequences, the ability to flex boundaries on an adult who's doing something inappropriate. There's a million reasons why that approach is much more work on the front end, but that is like the holistic approach. And it's awesome that you did that. And also, I think there's an element, a lot of parents don't want to give their kids choices. And I get that. Like, you don't want to spoil your kid and give them whatever choices, but like, sometimes if it's like, hey man, you could have macaroni and cheese or lasagna or whatever, like sometimes just that little bit of ownership instead of having like a 10-minute fight over the food, or do you want the blue cup or the red cup, depending on what age they are or whatever. Sometimes when you give them that empowerment and a little bit of ownership and the choice, that makes them feel like you're gonna get what you want because they're gonna comply more, but they don't feel like they were forced into it. And it's I think that's a winnable approach too. Do you see couples, like parent couples, and help them coach together? And if so, do you ever find one side is more into their emotions than the other, and one parent is more like some of these questions we were getting in the comments, like my partner is more resistant to this because he wasn't taught it growing up, and he hasn't, like, for me it was like I didn't tap into my emotions until like I hit rock bottom. I had a whole bunch of calamity happen in my life. I was like facing an uber depression. I went to counseling because I couldn't take it anymore, and that's what started this journey for me. But not everybody gets there, right? So somebody who doesn't quite see it this way, and how to help bridge the gap between the two partners without causing a bigger gap, but like, that you want to do conscious parenting in your household, but the partner maybe is like not totally opposed to it, but he or she is not quite there yet. Do you have any suggestions for how to help that collaboration and that communication?
Yes, absolutely. And so, I mean, I see this all the time, and unfortunately, 99.9% of the time, it's the dads, and so
Shame on us.
no shame,
I'm just joking. I'm just
self-compassion.
joking. No, I know. I'm just kidding.
I know.
It is. It's mostly the dads.
And it can be it can be really it can be a process, just because one of the things that can happen is, all of these childhood wounds, right, that are just below the surface, they're right there, and that's in many cases that's coloring the conversation, right? So it's not just about the parenting style, right? It's about both, partners' sort of experience of parenting, and sometimes I'll get scenarios where the mom had a painful or negative experience being parented, and she is so determined to do the opposite for her kids, and then the dad is like, no, I think that the way that we were parented is the way, and it makes sure that we have kids who are compliant and all these types of things, and so one of the things that I always recommend is to start from that place of common ground, and the place of common ground is always, you want what's best for your child. Every single parent, even the parents who do things that are harmful to their child, their intent is not to cause harm. Their intent is to just figure out how to handle the weight of parenting. And parenting it's hard. It's extremely hard. And kids don't come with a manual. You have to figure it out as you go along, and all you have are the tools that you were given from your own experience being parented. And so one of the things that I've found is when I really pull it back to that common ground, I'm saying, well, let's think about your child. Let's take a moment for a moment and just think about your child. Like, what does your child need from you? And so one of the things that does is it kind of helps to reset the parent a little bit, for them to say, well, do I know what my child needs from me? And of course, your mileage may vary. There are some parents who say, I know exactly what my child needs from me, and, it's this. And then that's usually when I then kind of talk a little bit about the science behind it, and I talk about, what are some of the outcomes that you're getting right now. So, say, you're getting a child who is dysregulated. You're getting a child who, maybe, there's been such a damage to the relationship that they're not really coming to you for comfort. They're not really coming to you even just for play and interaction. Is this the outcome? Is this an outcome that you are satisfied with? And usually the parent is going to say, no, I'm not satisfied with this outcome, right? And so that's really where we start to say, well, what does the outcome that you want look like? You want your child to be happy. Yes, you want your child to be compliant. And then we might dig a little bit deeper into, like, why is it so important for you for your child to be compliant? Why is it so important for you for your child to present in this way? And usually, as we're having these conversations, it starts to bring out some of the things that the parents themselves are struggling with. And that's when we can kind of bring it out and say, hey, you really have an opportunity to be a cycle breaker here. You really have an opportunity to be a cycle builder. And all of this has to happen from really the context of the relationship. And so in many cases, when I'm starting in this journey with parents, I'm the person who just listens and validates and really, I really am very curious about what their journey has looked like. And 9 times out of 10, what I find is that these parents are exhausted, they're at their wits' end, and they are just trying to keep it together. And then when you have that sort of disparity between one partner's perspective and another partner's perspective about how to approach the same challenge, it's really recognizing, there's going to be some work that needs to happen at the level of how you co-parent, and there's also going to be some work that needs to happen at the level of your relationship with each other, because there's something in that disconnect that really says one or both of these partners doesn't feel safe enough to say, hey, I am really struggling and I don't know what to do, and I am so afraid of not knowing what to do that I'm putting up this mask, this front of, sort of like being really tough and being really distant and being really controlling, where really all that's coming from it is fear.
It is fear. And I think a lot of men, in my experience, at least in my peer group, they're not even aware that they're wearing that mask. That's where the challenging part for me breaking through for them is too. In fact, you talked about coming from a place of childhood wounds. I literally just made a reel the other day because I love this quote, but I said, like, hey guys, I know it's very difficult to investigate and unpack our childhood, to acknowledge that we have wounds, to get into therapy, to do healing. But if you don't heal from what hurt you, you are going to bleed onto people who didn't cut you. And those people are your loved ones. They're your kids. They're your partners. They're your friends. And I don't know if for me that resonates as a dude. I don't want to bleed on the people who didn't cut me. I don't want to bleed on anybody, but I certainly don't want to bleed on from those wounds onto my kid. That's so whack. And so I think you were talking about provocative questions like, what does your kid need from you? I know for like a lot of guys in my peer group, like in the fire service, like they're very alpha male leadership oriented. Well, they need a leader. They need somebody to show them how to model emotional regulation, show them how to navigate bullies, not shut them up and put them in the room and tell them don't cry. Show them how to cry when somebody dies, how to grieve. Show them how they need, like, if you go to war, and war is so ugly, but just for this analogy, there's like the generals in the back who are telling people what to do from the safety, and then there's the guys who lead from the front and go into battle with their charge like Braveheart. You want to be that leader. You want to be going through it with your kid. It's uncomfortable. I don't like learning about my feelings. I don't like crying, but I'm doing it with them. That is what they need from you. They need a leader. They don't need a hall monitor compliance officer who flies off the handle at them. And that is hard for a lot of dudes to hear, but it's real talk, you know what I mean? And so that doesn't work in a set like, but I'm talking like when I'm talking to other firemen, that's like the language we speak, and that's how I can kind of break through to them and ask them, like, what, there's different fire captains. There's the guys who are the first one in the door with you, and then there's the guys who sit back in the truck and watch you and then micromanage and criticize everything you're doing and yell at you in front of other fire crews. Which one do you like working for? Well, you're the captain of your house with your kids. You're their captain. You be that leader that you, I find leaders to be inspirational, but leaders, they do, they model, they go with, and it's not about telling people what to do. So I don't know if that's a good way to tap into guys, the dads who are like that. That's why I want to tell them, like, I'm brave. I went and kicked in 100, more than 100 doors and gone into burning buildings. It's more brave to investigate your childhood and heal from your wounds and to cry those tears and to tell your kids, I don't know how I'm going to sit through this with you, but I'm going to sit in this feeling. You think it's easy for me to sit with being a dude who was never taught about feelings? I have an 11-year-old girl and she's most comfortable talking to me about her relationship and belief issues. It's very uncomfortable for me, but that's part of what it is. That's where it's rewarding. Sit in it, figure it out, step outside of your comfort zone, and foster that connection. It's hard. I'm gonna cry talking about it. I get emotional. It's the best job you could ever be, asked to get. It's the most honorable thing you can do, I think, and I think that can tap into a lot of dudes who are oriented that way, who are like, it's like, be honorable, be a fierce leader, and also, what do they need from you? I think, yes, they need nurturing. They need to be taught how to get good grades and comply. They need to know that you have their back. They need to know when they go to that school and they're bullied or that boy is mean to them, says she has a big forehead or whatever. They need to know that they're going to come home and dad loves me. They need to know, another comment on here said their kids are testing them. Sometimes I think my kids are testing me, like, how ugly can I get with you? Because I don't believe this connection is this good. And I think I can do something to get you to walk away. And I have boundaries and guidelines, but they can't ever do anything to make me dislike them. And I need to, sometimes they want to know that subconsciously, I believe. I don't know if science proves that, but that's what it feels like.
Yes, absolutely. And so just from a perspective of human development, what happens is, like, right from when we're born, our job is to learn about the world, the way the world works, and how we can engage with the world so that we survive it and so that we can, deal with it. And so kids are born into a family, and so their world is their family, the relationships, the things that happen to them. And so that's the point at which kids are then thinking to themselves. And, of course, this is not happening on a conscious level, but it is saying, well,
Right.
What happens if I do this? Will I get the same response each time? And that's really, really important for being able to develop into, let's say, a whole person, because learning that the same thing happens every single time, consistently, that provides stability, that provides emotional regulation. Oh, I can trust that every single time I cry, my parent is going to come and they're going to give me comfort. And so I know that my needs matter. I know that my needs will be responded to by a person. And so I'm better able to distinguish between the people who care for me, the people who love me, and the people who don't, because the people who love me will consistently respond to my emotional needs. And so that's how it can get so out of whack when, maybe parents are inconsistent or just not present, because then what that child is learning about the world is that love is conditional. And then that's when you start to get the kids who put on a mask, because if they're learning that their caregiver is not going to respond to their tears, but that they'll respond to their grades, they're going to focus all their energy on what can they do to get these grades, because that's what survival means, right? And children are so dependent on their parents for their self-esteem, for their sense of self, for their, sort of sense of just how the world works. And so that's what, like, parenting is, it's so hard, but it's such a powerful role, because you get to teach your kids what the world is like. You get to teach your kids what to expect from other people. And they're going to soak up all of that knowledge, and then they're going to apply it. If I could share another personal story, like I just had the opportunity this past weekend, really, just to witness this just really beautiful thing with my brother and his 8-year-old. They were watching a show, and it's about a superhero ladybug, something like that. And then I noticed that they were watching the show, but then they're also having a conversation. And so apparently he missed an episode, and she was filling him in, and then he was asking her these questions, and she was responding, and I knew he didn't really care about the information, but they were having a conversation about something that she cares about, and he was listening to her, giving her his full attention. In that moment, he's teaching her, the men that love you will listen to you. They will care about what you have to say, and they will
beautiful.
to you. Yeah, and so when that happens, when parents are really conscious and intentional about the way that they are engaging with their kids, the way that they are teaching their kids to see themselves, then what you'll find is that that testing will stop. And so the testing happens for as long as the child is trying to figure out what to expect.
I think something that goes a long way in that situation too, like this quote here, like she about acting like his dad to get his approval, and I think it's super important to know that when we tell our kids, "Don't cry, get out of here, don't cry," or whatever, that's natural for lots of men, especially, to tell their boys not to cry. It happens because that's what was told to us. But it's super important to know that when those emotions and that energy, they have to go somewhere. And on a very extreme example, if you suppress that natural way we have of saying, "I'm sad," putting a name to your feeling, "I feel sad. Hey, can I sit with you with this? Cry those tears, it's okay." Yeah, you can't have a huge meltdown at a restaurant where people are trying to eat. We might have to take it outside, or there's parameters on when it's appropriate and how it's appropriate to express your emotions. But telling a boy or a girl, "Don't cry," they're going to internalize or externalize those emotions at some point. And we see like teenagers, they cut themselves, they go into depression. On the very extreme end, we see school shootings. That's a huge accumulation of a bunch of "don't cries." I mean, there's way more to it than that. I'm not trying to be derivative, but like that's the extreme example of what we're doing when we force our kids to suppress their emotions. They have to have a safe and healthy person and place. It is natural to cry when you are a child, even if you're a boy, and we need to not shove that down. It's also okay to not want your kid to have wild tantrums, and we have to work on that. I'm not all the way over here on this, but like, get out of here, take it out of here, don't cry. It feels natural to lots of dudes because that's what we were told, but it's really rough on them. And then the other thing I was going to say is a lot of times we don't know what to say to our kids, but like, it's okay. Kids are really receptive when you make amends, and that's just another opportunity. So you can go to your kid when you screw up and go, you have a teenage boy and you're like Emily was saying, like he's acting on his dad to get his approval, to go in there when it's okay, when it's not heated emotions, and just be like, "Hey, here's the deal. I don't always show it in the moment. I don't always make you feel this way. I yell and I snap, and I'm sorry, I'm working on it. Nobody taught me growing up, but I do love you, and I will always have your back. And even if it doesn't feel that way in the moment, and even if I don't show it, I'm your ride or die." It just takes 1 second of just saying that occasionally. That is like so meaningful for like a parent to look their kid in the eye and tell them, "I have your back. I love you. You're worthy to me and valuable to me, whether you get F's or A's." We might have to like take the iPhone away if you're getting F's, but it doesn't take away your value or your love in any way, shape, or form. I love you even when I'm yelling at you, even though I wish I didn't yell at you, but like, it doesn't feel that way, but that's a me thing. Sometimes sometimes you're making withdrawals from that account, add those deposits in too, can go a long way. Sometimes those kids, they don't know that, and they need to hear it from their parent. Nobody said it to us growing up, so we're not accustomed to speaking that way. But that's been helpful in my household. So, okay, I'm glad that Emily said that was helpful. So I think this gets recorded too if he wants to watch this, or down the road or whatever. Does that resonate with your what you teach?
Oh yes, absolutely. Listen, all of it, 100%, and it keeps going back down to that whole idea of I think consciously examining some of those patterns that you want to change about your own experience. And I think one of the biggest ones that I've seen and that I've sort of worked with parents on, I think just kind of stepping back away from a little bit, is that idea of parents being these perfect, or wanting to project this sort of sense of perfection to their kids. And one of the challenges with that is that no human is perfect. And when a parent tries to suppress the parts of themselves that they don't want their kids to see, and obviously not saying let it all hang out, because there's, it's about a balance, right? But, certainly what's going to happen eventually is that the kids are going to grow up and they're going to see those flaws, and then that's going to rupture the relationship, because then it's like, well, who is this person that I've been living with this whole time? They presented themselves a certain type of way, or they told me to do these certain types of things, but then they're not actually doing these certain types of things themselves. So I think that sense of, being comfortable being vulnerable with your children and saying, hey, I messed up. I lost my temper. I'm working to be better at this, and I want you to forgive me. That goes such a long way.
It
And
does.
I think one of the ways that parents can sometimes put pressure on themselves is by thinking that they have to get it right 100% of the time.
Yes.
And, oh, I don't want to damage my kids. Oh, I got to watch myself. But then you're creating pressure for yourself, and you're creating, this.
And pressure for them, because
right.
it's a beautiful opportunity. It's a beautiful opportunity when you go apologize to them, to show them like, hey, not only is dad imperfect and takes accountability, and I'm doing repair work here, I'm sorry I yelled at you, but also you can take a little pressure off yourself when you yell at dad or you yell at your friends, because I'm modeling to you that like none of us are perfect. It's just that we're all humans. We love each other. We're going to make mistakes. And here's what we do when we make those mistakes so that we can repair the relationship.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes if parents focus on creating the perfect relationship with their child, they can actually set themselves up for failure. So you don't want to do that. You want to embrace the process, recognize that you are going to make mistakes, recognize that you are going to slip up, and then just be ready to model to your kids, hey, this is what it looks like when you don't meet your own expectations for yourself. You pick yourself up, you hold yourself accountable, you do the work to be better, and you just keep going.
And sometimes giving your kids ownership, like a lot of times parents think they have to be this looming boss, but like asking them, how can I make it right? You might not be able to do, they buy me a car, no, but like, hey, try not to yell at me, it hurts my feelings or whatever. Like a lot of times I think we're in this like one-way communication rather than like asking them, like, how does it feel when I snapped at you like that, and how can I make it right? Sometimes that's enough to kind of like, oh man, you hear how you made your kid feel and you're like, damn, now that I kind of had a hint, a suspicion I made him feel like that. But when you actually hear it, not in a shame way, but like it breaks through to your heart, when for like the guys who are uncomfortable making amends or doing repair work, or they don't want to hear that they're causing the damage. Sometimes if you give your kid the opportunity to answer you, like, what is your experience when I talk to you like this? It's hard to hear, but it's also beautiful intel, because then it's like, we don't want to make our kids feel like that at the end of the day. Most of us don't, you know what I mean? And it's hard to hear, but like it's good accountability too. And then also they feel heard. Giving them a chance to have their voice heard goes such a long way in any of this emotional communication, or when you're doing consequences, if you involve them in the process, like collaborative problem solving, like, hey, I think that if you get a C on your report card, you should lose your phone for 30 days. What do you think? And they'll say, well, I think I should lose my phone for 1 day. And I go, well, how about 15 days? When in reality, I was going to do 15 days anyways. But just the fact that you give them buy-in and you give them input, there's something to make them feel seen and heard and valued and validated, and like this is a relationship rather than like a micromanaging boss relationship. It gets you more compliance in the long run, because you have that nurtured connection, but you also get that nurtured relationship that isn't going to rupture down the line. Just like any relationship, right? We want it to be a two-way exchange of love and connection.
Absolutely. And, it's one of the things that I say to parents all the time is, it's really important to remember that your kid is a person. And, you got a chance to, meet them when they were a baby and when they were still figuring out how the world works. But, as they got older, there came a time when their world expanded beyond your interaction. And so what that means is it's really important for you to take the time to get to know who they are, get to know how they think, what they think about. And in those conversations, that's where the relationship builds. And I think it can feel very counterintuitive for parents to think, well, I know my child. And it's like, the child that you gave birth to, but, it's important to get to know this person who's also growing and developing under your care. And it's such a delicate balance, because there can be instances where if a parent is so focused on, their idea or their vision for their child's future, and the child is aware of that, the child can start to, project or perform to meet those expectations, to meet that vision. And so the parent's going to think, oh, I know my child so well, but in reality, their child is hiding themselves because they've realized that what is going to get their parents' approval, what's going to get that connection that they so desperately want, is if they conform to this picture or this image that their parents have of who they are. And you know, it never bodes well down the line, because at some point there's going to be a conflict between that child, you know, who that child actually is, and maybe who their parents want them to be. And that's when you can have some of those circumstances that happen where, you know, so for the parent, they're saying, this came out of nowhere. They were such a good kid. They just did all the things and they were compliant, but, you know, they didn't realize that that was their child performing for the sake of safety. And like one of the things that I feel like I'm a broken record on it, is just really talking about the concept of psychological safety, emotional safety, where I'm saying, when your actions create safety for this person, whether it's your child or your partner, your friends, your coworker, your boss, whatever the case may be, you will see who they are. They will reveal themselves to you. You will get to know them for all of the ways that they are. And then that's when the real relationship starts. Because when you see the real person, then you can start to say, hey, you know, I'm noticing this. Or, you know, maybe this is hard for you, this is hard for me. This combination of you and I, we have an opportunity to work collaboratively from a genuine place of helping each other grow. And I think that is the beauty of the parent-child relationship, is you as an adult, you get to see this little person who thinks they know everything about how the world works. And, you know, you have so much to teach them. And, you know, what you do to build that relationship, what you do to create that safety, will give you the opportunity to teach them all the things that you know.
Oh man, that was so powerful. And especially because our time is running short, I feel like that's a great ending point. Do you think, I don't even want to add to that. I mean, it goes back to what you were saying, stay curious. And, we have so much to teach them, but they have so much to teach us too, about ourselves and about who they are. And you said so many powerful things there. Like, we knew them when they were a baby, but it's a perpetually evolving development of an entirely independent human being, different than what we have expectations for them to be, and different than who we are. And sometimes we have to not only accept, but embrace and lean into their individuality and let them develop into who they want to be, and be curious rather than thinking that we know who they are and letting them project that onto us because they think that love is conditional based on them meeting this expectation that we set, and then they suppress their authentic selves. That was game changing. Is there anything else? I feel like that's a great stopping point. I can't add anything that's more powerful than what you just said. Was there anything that we didn't get to?
No, I mean, I think it's just like you summed it up perfectly. It is, you know, it all comes down to relationship. Like, what is it at the end of the day that makes our lives meaningful? It's the relationships that we're part of. You know, everything is done. Like, you're not going to be sitting on, you know, your deathbed thinking about all the money you accumulated in your bank account,
No.
all the things that you accomplished. They're going to be surrounded by the people who love you and that you love, and that's going to be the memories that you have with all those people. That's going to be the thing that keeps you in that moment. And sometimes we get so caught up in the craziness of life that we forget that, and we pour so much time and so much energy into things that are ultimately not as important as the relationships that we have with other people. And our ability to keep growing them and nurturing them, and sort of making sure that they add value to our lives and then to the lives of the people we're in relationship with as well.
That was incredible. Deborah, thank you so much for the work you're doing. You're changing the world. Thank you for inviting me to have this conversation. I learned so much, and you literally are changing the world. This is amazing work you're doing. I appreciate our connection so much.
Yes, likewise. Thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation with me, and thank you to everyone who joined, because I think, you know, the more we have these conversations, the more we can all do our part to change the world together.
I think we should definitely do this again more than one time if you're down.
Oh, yes.
All right, well, enjoy the rest of your day, everybody who tuned in. Thank you so much for watching this. Bye, everybody.
Bye.